Chair, PB13 is all set. Whenever you're ready, sir.
Good afternoon. I hereby call this August the 10th meeting of the Public Safety Committee to order. I'd like to thank all of our police, fire, and emergency management, brave men and women who go out every single day and ensure that we are safe in the city of Winston-Salem. We'd like to give you honor today. Due to the Safer at Home order, all committee members are participating virtually. For virtual meetings, committee members will be muted until asked to be heard. When there is a vote, it will be necessary to take a roll call vote. A committee member will be recognized and will raise their hand and state their vote. Committee members for the Public Safety Committee are Councilmember Jeff McIntosh, Councilmember John Larson, Councilmember Morticia Parman, and myself. Items on the consent agenda are approved with one unanimous sweeping motion unless a member of this committee wishes an item to be pulled for consideration. Members of the committee, we have a need from staff to hold item C5. Other than that, I would entertain a motion if there are items that need to be pulled. If there are no items that need to be pulled, I'd entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the balance.
Is there a second?
Second.
With the exception of item C5, the consent agenda has been motioned and properly seconded. We'll now do the roll call. Councilmember Jeff McIntosh.
Aye.
Councilmember Larson.
Yes.
Councilmember Parman. Councilmember Parman.
I think she's having computer problems.
Yes.
And it's a yes for myself. So the consent agenda has been approved. We'll move to item G1, please.
Item G1, consideration of items regarding the 2020 Burn Justice Assistance Grant resolution authorize the interlocal agreement between the City of Winston-Salem and the County of Forsyth to share a 2020 Burn Justice Assistance Grant Program Award. Ordinance amending project budget ordinance for the City of Winston-Salem for fiscal year 2020-2021.
Members of the committee, this item was discussed at length in the Finance Committee. Apparently, the item was moved forward without a recommendation to the full council for consideration. We can discuss that item at this time, or we could make a similar motion that the Finance Committee made in the interest of time. I'd entertain a motion or a conversation at this time.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Larson.
Yes, if could you explain for me briefly what it was that you proposed as compared to what's actually being put forward in this motion? I wasn't quite clear. We got a little confused about all the different grant requests that are going in and what is being proposed here under this JAG program versus what you were, I assume, a modification. Is that correct?
Yeah, I certainly don't want to steal any thunder from Assistant City Manager Logan Ford or the police department staff, but the conversation was centered around the acceptance of a $192,045 in JAG dollars. Now, this money will be split between the sheriff's office and between the Winston-Salem Police Department. The proposal was, I think the police department presented us with a list of things that they would like to use the money for, which was office equipment and field equipment. The proposal was to take our share of the money and use it to purchase real-time cameras to go into communities that have experienced high volumes of crime, drugs, and gun violence, and use that as a pilot program or an initiative to reduce that gun violence. What we find from the police department is that many folks who have information on a crime are reluctant to come forward because out of fear of retaliation. So this could be a way for us to work with the community, but be able to see what's happening in those communities at the same time. The committee ultimately moved forward and through information from staff to Monday without a recommendation. So that was a general Mr. Larson, of what happened.
So for clarity, the proposal out of this grant, though, sequentially occurs after the other grant that was being proposed, that in timing, the second grant is being applied for, which covers some of the same camera work proposals. So as far as we're concerned, really we got duplicate. Everybody agrees on the need. There's no disagreement about the need to have cameras in these neighborhoods. I guess the question really resolves around which grant, or are we replicating grants here competing against ourselves or what have you based on the grant proposals that are going in and the sequential aspect of those grants. Is that a fair statement, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, we had a conversation about the timing of those grants. I think staff was going to get us some information before Monday, but I'll just kick it. And I saw Councilman McIntosh, I saw your hand, but I'll kick it to Assistant City Manager Logan Ford for an update.
Thank you, Chairman Taylor. Members of the committee, Councilmember Taylor accurately identified the information that we still need to bring forward. It's a question of timing. And also we were going to provide some additional information regarding the details and the types of cameras and the equipment that we applied for in the second grant. We hope to have that information available for the council at Monday's meeting.
Have your question been answered, Mr. Larson?
Well, in a way. So if we were to approve the grant as Councilmember Taylor is suggesting, and then we were to go ahead and get the grant that has just been submitted, how much flexibility do we have to change the funding priorities and use the money maybe in a little different way?
So that was one of the questions that staff would need to answer. In past, whenever we've gotten a JAG grant, we've identified the type of equipment that was going to be purchased. So at this point, I'm not sure that we have the flexibility to make those adjustments after we've already submitted the grant. So that's information that staff would clarify and then bring back to the council at Monday's meeting.
But we have to submit the JAG grant prior to receiving the information on acceptance of the other grant, is whether
yes, we do. Yes, we do. We'll have to submit this information before we have a response back to the larger grant that we applied for cameras.
If we get the grant, if we end up getting the other grant, the larger grant that's being submitted, do we have other uses and applications for if we have more cameras than we need currently for the amount for the areas that have been targeted so far? I mean, is this going to really be an abundance of wealth as far as cameras go, or do we actually got a need that we could apply that material in spite of getting the earlier grant money for cameras? Does that make any sense?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, you want to know if there is, would there be any money left over, any money in reserves that could be used for other equipment if we're able to fully purchase the cameras out of the second grant? Is that correct?
If we get both, if we allocate both grants toward cameras, are we going to have an abundance of cameras that we're not going to be able to use?
I don't know that you'll have an abundance of cameras that you're not going to be able to use. The question that comes with the cameras is also some of the infrastructure that's needed to support the cameras. So it's not just a matter of being able to purchase cameras.
Okay.
Mr. Larson, I think it's a good practice to measure 10 times and cut once, and we want to be as careful as possible. So what I'm hearing is we're going to keep measuring, and before we cut, we'll have all the information. Councilman McIntosh.
Yeah, so I guess one of the primary things here to me is the JAG is non-competitive. The other grant is competitive. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that plays a large part in my mind. Thank you.
Councilwoman Scipio.
As I heard, the JAG grant, you apply now and you get it sometime next year. And then the one that you're going to apply for, is that received? You hear from it sooner?
There is the turnaround time on the second grant could possibly be sooner, where we could realize those dollars and actually have the equipment available sooner than if we were to use a JAG grant. But part of the clarification and the information that staff would want to bring back is to try to clarify those timelines so that the council can make an informed decision.
Great.
Right. And I also heard this was a little unclear. Okay. I know in the past, you've always had a list of how you're spending the JAG money, but is that absolutely essential that you could use it for any thing in the police department or police department?
Councilmember Scipio, what I can share with you is we've always provided the list of equipment in the past. It can't be used to supplant regular operating out of the budget. But in terms of whether or not it's an actual requirement that we have to list that, I would have to defer to the police department staff on that as to the answer to that question. Mm-hmm. And again, if they are not sure as to whether or not we specifically have to state the needed equipment when we apply for the funds, then we would have that for you on Monday as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
important.
Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard on item G1? Again, Finance has moved this forward without a recommendation. It'd be my recommendation to do the same in public safety. So if the council is amenable, I'd entertain a motion.
Motion to move it forward without recommendation.
Is there a second?
Second.
We go to the roll call. Councilmember McIntosh,
Aye.
Councilman Larson,
Yes.
Councilman Parman,
Yes.
and that's a yes for me. So this item G1 moves forward without a recommendation. Thank you. Item G2, please.
Item G2, ordinance amending chapter 38, article 1, section 3810I of the Winston-Salem City Code to allow state and/or federal wildlife officers to discharge rifles for the purpose of eliminating deer within the boundaries of Smith Reynolds Airport until August 19, 2021.
Assistant City Manager Logan Ford, please.
Thank you, Chairman Taylor. Last April, the committee heard a request from the airport to allow the use of rifles and silencers to address wildlife that was at the airport. At the time, it was primarily a concern that we were having with deer. They also mentioned some concerns with wild turkeys. At that time, the council agreed to this change and it would sunset after 1 year. The airport has provided another request to extend this provision for an additional year, and I would ask Attorney Lori Sykes if she would go into a little bit more detail and explain the specifics of this. And we also have Mr. Mark Davidson with the airport that's available in case there are additional questions from the committee. Attorney Sykes?
Attorney Sykes, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, when this was originally before the city council last year, it was agreed that we would give it a 1-year time frame to see how the program was managed, to see if there were any issues with it, and then to assess it for another year going forward. So Director Davidson has asked for that 1-year extension. We have not, to my knowledge, gotten any complaints or concerns, and the airport has agreed that they would do the notifications and the advertisement of the program as they did last year when it was approved.
Thank you, Attorney Sykes. When this came up last year, I guess our biggest concerns was the neighborhood informed and are they protected? And I think after a year, we have a good understanding of how that shook out, and the answer is yes. This came forward when Mayor Pro Temp Burke was here as Councilwoman of the Northeast Ward. We have a new Councilwoman of the Northeast Ward, Councilmember Parman. So I'm going to pause for a moment and just kick it to Councilwoman Parman, who is the Councilwoman of the area, just to see if she has any comments or questions.
So I've been keeping up with what's been going on over at the airport. I think my biggest concern, well, one of my concerns is, even though you keep doing a sunset date, Mr. Davidson, why didn't y'all just put in for something more permanent than to continue to do a 1-year term? If you know that this is something you're going to be ongoing doing, because the airport isn't going anywhere.
Councilwoman Parman, we're going to ask Mr. Davidson to speak, but I will say, as chairman of the committee, I remember us having candid, detailed conversations, and we wanted to just make sure that the community was protected. So it made sense just to do it for a little while. As I say, we measure 10 times and cut once, and when it's time to cut, we'll know what we need to do. So it wasn't necessarily Mr. Davidson's idea solely. It was his idea along in conjunction with the members of this council and committee, just to make sure we keep a close eye on how we move forward.
So I do know we do have an issue with wild turkeys over in that community as well as the deers. So it's not just the deers that's been posing an issue. So as long as we can continue to get the notification properly that the residents need, with the notification is what's going on in a timely manner, then you have my support for the 1-year term again.
We mentioned Mr. Davidson. Thanks for your feedback, Councilwoman Parman. Mr. Davidson, do you want to come and give us any information that you might want to provide about this issue?
Sure. Thank you so much last year for approving this amendment to the ordinance. The United States Department of Agriculture, Wildlife Services was able to perform what we wanted them to do. We've had less sightings. I don't know if you want me to get into any of the numbers, but we were able to donate the meat to the local charities per Councilmember Adams, and it was a success in regards to harvesting. Like I said, we've had less sightings, but we recently, for instance, Mr. Joe Budd was taking off on runway, or is landing on runway 33 and sighted 3 deer on the runway this past month. So that's why I'd like to keep it in effect. And I did request that it be a permanent change, but I understand that we go year to year. So we're fine with that.
And Mr. Davidson, because the public's involved, being in close proximity to the airport, if you could just give us the numbers for our information. I know you visited the airport 5 times, and we've got some numbers here in our report, but if you can give those, please.
Okay. The United States Department of Agriculture came out, had 5 times, like you just said. 27 deer were harvested. Over 700 pounds of meat were donated to local charities, and it happened during the Thanksgiving, Christmas time. So there was some positive public relations in regards to that. And what was the other question?
Well, and there was.
Yeah, let me just mention about public relations and in regards to what also came out of it is that the county started a newsletter. We send out a newsletter to the adjoining neighbors every 3 to 4 months, and we include the wildlife plan as well as other activities at the airport. That's been a huge success. And if you haven't seen the newsletters, they're really professionally done, and I can circulate them to the committee. But that was one way we outreached, as well as signage and putting on our webpage, and also communicating with the city.
So, Mr. Davidson, it sounds like this was beautifully executed with 0 incidents. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard on this item? Considering no one else, we'd kick it to Councilwoman Parman for a motion.
I have a motion that we pass item G2 on the agenda.
Is there a second? Now to the roll call. Councilman McIntosh.
Aye.
Councilman Larson.
Yes.
Councilwoman Parman.
Yes.
And that is a yes from me. So that item passes unanimously and moves to Monday. So item G2 has been completed. Thank you, Mr. Davidson.
Thank you.
Item G3, please.
Item G3, resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an interlocal agreement between the city of Winston-Salem on behalf of the Winston-Salem Police Department, the county of Forsyth on behalf of the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office, and the town of Kernersville on the behalf of Kernersville Police Department for the formation of a drug task force and to enter into a lease agreement for office and workspace for said drug task force.
Assistant City Manager Ford.
Thank you, Chairman Taylor. We have with us Captain Cardwell that will present this item. This is for us to form a joint drug task force with Forsyth County and also with Kernersville. Our existing task forces has a location here in the city, but we have long outgrown that space. It was an opportunity for us to think about how we collaborate together. So the information that you have talks about the task force itself and how it functions. And there's also some information about the lease associated with the facility as well. So I would ask Captain Cardwell if he would present this item, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Captain Cardwell, you have the floor.
Good evening, Chair Taylor, Vice Chair McIntosh, council members. Mike Cardwell, I'm a captain over our Special Investigation Division. Our primary mission is, of course, to keep drugs and the manufacture of drugs off of our streets, keeping our community safe. We've had probably the best teamwork we've had in years working with Kernersville and the Forsyth County Sheriff's Department. All 3 of our groups focused on working together. This task force is basically the next step. Right now, all 3 groups are housed in 3 different buildings throughout Forsyth County. By bringing us together under one house, it's going to allow us to use our resources more effectively, communicate more effectively, be able to have a common focus on how we investigate these drug organizations that are coming in or trying to come in our community. So it should increase our efforts and at the same time just use our resources more effectively. By establishing this new task force location, it's also going to give us an anchor for our other partners, our federal partners and state partners. The DEA, the North Carolina State SBI, they've all agreed to have agents come and work with us, and that way we'll have a facility large enough to have us, have all of us together in one location. That brings resources from the feds and states that we just don't have, and honestly could not afford when it comes to the analytical functions, looking at digital evidence, and trying to identify these organizations that are not only based here locally, but also in other states and even outside of our country. So All those benefits will bring us together. It'll unify a common command structure that'll be led by each agency department head. And it'll keep everybody in pace with each other about how we approach these investigations.
Thank you, Captain Caldwell. I mean, I think we all would agree that our community, our city, our county is all better off when we collaborate. So this certainly makes sense. Is there anyone who has any direct questions for Captain Caldwell or any member of the public safety team? Councilman McIntosh.
Handle on the net cost. I see where the county will be absorbing 40% of the cost of the lease. Is Kernersville participating in that as well? And just overall, will this produce any cost savings, or will there be any additional cost to us in this?
I'll defer to Kirk Burlinger a little bit on some of the contract discussions, but looking at the financials that I have, we're basically going into this with our current operating budget. We will absorb approximately 60% of the cost, with the Forsyth County Sheriff's Department absorbing the 40%. Kernersville is going to keep their current facility that we will make use of for equipment storage. And then as we evaluate the task force, we'll look at making adjustments with Kernersville possibly coming in financially.
And Mr. Bjorling is our real estate czar, and he was mentioned. Did you want to add anything to the conversation, sir?
Well, I would just mention that the space that that they're in now is just about 6,000 square feet of office space, and the space that's proposed to be moved into, in addition to about that same amount of office space, the building contains 21,000 square feet, and only about 6,000 of that is office space. So you're gaining an additional huge warehouse space that has multiple functions that the task force can use. Also, there's no parking to speak of in their current facility. They have a large parking lot that they'll be able to operate out of. It's entirely fenced and secure. The property owner is willing to spend about $82,000 on the initial upfit of the property. And I believe that the police department are very enthusiastic about the task force being able to move into this facility. Be glad to answer any other questions.
Mr. McIntosh, have your questions been satisfied?
Yes, thank you.
Councilman Larson.
Obviously, drug crime does not respect the Winston-Salem boundaries, city boundaries. So I think this is brilliant and long overdue to partner and coordinate a comprehensive program within the county. Is the location secret, Art? Can you tell us exactly where this facility is going to be located?
Councilmember Larson, we typically don't disclose the location of the facility.
So this is going to operate under a cloak of darkness or whatever. Yeah, that cloak facility. Well, congratulations, whoever came up with this idea to the joint program. Kudos to you guys for doing that.
Councilwoman Scipio. You're on mute, ma'am, if you can hear me.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. I know that we couldn't divulge the facility site, but it is in Winston-Salem and not in Kernersville. Is that right? Or can you tell me?
Within the city limits of Winston-Salem.
Okay, that's terrific. And the operation cost of this task force is coming out of our current budgets that we have budgeted, or are all the funds coming from a special source?
It's coming out of our existing operating budget.
Okay, great. And given the agreement, once it is signed, how soon will this begin? This task force be starting?
So I will ask Captain Caldwell to respond. I know there are some memorandums of agreement that have to be signed. One thing I do want to make sure the committee is aware of, and this goes back to the terms of the lease. We are leasing this space. The city of Winston-Salem will enter into a lease agreement for 10 years. The memorandum of understanding around the partnerships are for an initial term of 5 years with our partner agencies, with the option for us to then renew those on an annual basis. And part of that is based on, as you may have, some changes in leadership, we want to have the opportunity to be able to negotiate those terms with other partners that are at the table with us. But I did want to make sure that the committee was aware that our lease and what the city of Winston-Salem will be signing would be for an initial 10-year period. And Captain Carwell, if you'd like to speak to the timing of when we would be able to stand the task force up and have it operational.
Captain Carwell.
So we currently work together on operations. So we're working together now. The problem is having a facility that we can all meet at the same time. No one agency has a facility that will allow that as we are right now. So if we were to get approval today, we would probably have staff with the upfit. The estimation I've been given by the architect and the upfit contractor is approximately 2 months of upfit. But we are currently working on joint operations. It's just that the hindrance of not being able to be in the same place at the same time.
Good. Thank you.
So in conclusion on this item, we know at least one thing, that we cannot divulge the secret location of the Batcave. However, are there any additional questions or concerns that we should be considered on item G3? Seeing nothing, then I'd entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
And a second. We'll go to the roll call. Councilman Larson,
Yes.
Councilman McIntosh,
Aye.
Councilwoman Parman.
Yes.
And that's a yes from me, so that is unanimous. Item G3 is approved to Monday. And let's move to item G4, please.
Item G4, resolution to support and adopt the Northern Piedmont Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan.
Queuing us up on this item, I'll recognize Assistant City Manager Damon DeCane. You have the floor, sir.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the Public Safety Committee. I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to our City County Emergency Management Director, Mr. August Vernon. He has a brief presentation to describe what we're trying to achieve with this item.
Mr. Vernon, thank you for being here today. You have the floor, sir.
All right. Good evening, council members. Can you hear me? Number one.
Yes.
I hear you well, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'm doing this off my phone. So again, thank you for the opportunity to talk about the Northern Piedmont Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan. Next slide, please. Let me take you real quick back to 1996 and to Hurricane Fran. If everyone remembers Hurricane Fran, that storm created quite a lot of problems in North Carolina, and over 50 counties were impacted by that hurricane and the flooding. So one of the lessons learned that came out of that storm is we needed a better look at planning for disasters. And one of the ways we do that is we certainly take very seriously the fact that we have winter storms, floods, and hurricanes. And those are all part of the world around us, as we've recently seen with COVID, hurricanes, and of course, earthquake tremors.
Great.
And obviously, we take those very seriously and consider that at sometimes those are a threat to human life, safety, and property. And the concept and practice of reducing risk, and that's what one of the things that we try to do, is to reduce risk to people and property for known hazards, is referred to as hazard mitigation. And again, this is the Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan. Next slide, please. All right, the Northern Piedmont region, and we have a lot of partnerships with this region for a variety of reasons. It includes Forsyth, Caswell, Davie, Rockingham, Stokes, Surrey, and Yadkin County, and the municipal governments within those counties. And what the Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan has done is takes all the plans from those counties into one single plan. Prior to this, the first version we did several years ago, almost 6 years ago, is all the counties had different plans, and that created a lot of confusion and issues and challenges. So this allowed us to pull one single plan together, which benefits us in a lot of ways. We've had a group working for almost 2 years to update this plan, which is very extensive. That includes everything from utilities to fire departments. We did have public hearings across our region, And what that allows us to do is develop a mitigation strategy based on the fact that we all have a lot of the similar hazards, which saves time, resources, and funding. Next slide, please. So another reason we want to do this is hazard mitigation plans are required by both the State Division of Emergency Management and the Federal Emergency Management Administration, so that we are eligible for certain types of hazard mitigation funding. That can be pre-event and for recovery and reimbursement funds for either federal or smaller state-declared disasters. The plan does identify hazards that could impact the region and identified a lot of those actions that we could implement to reduce vulnerability to those hazards. Also, a unique factor with this plan for the first time ever, this includes what is called man-made and technological hazards. That includes hazardous materials, chemical transportation, those type things, and infectious disease was included. So when we started this journey 2 years ago, we obviously had no idea that a pandemic would be on the horizon, but that was identified in the plan, and there are mitigation efforts identified for that, for those issues. So again, this is just, this plan exists. It's just been 5 years. It's been a very serious update, and we need to go ahead and get approval to implement this. Also had to give the same briefing to the county commissioners last week. That's all I have as far as slides. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Vernon. The theme for today seems to be collaboration. Are there any direct questions that may be had for Mr. Vernon regarding the Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan? Councilman Larson.
Mr. Vernon, is this plan being reviewed by FEMA or one of the other agencies? I understand, I read somewhere, I believe, that it was under review on a higher up level than where we are.
There's almost about 60 or 70 entities that were involved in the development of this plan. And state emergency management has been part of that effort. Once we approve our local plans, we then have to share it with the state and FEMA, but it does have to be approved and adopted for us to move it forward. And I will tell you, it's pretty extensive. It's almost 900 pages.
I understand that it is a large document. If recommendations are made up the line to make modifications to this document, are we informed of that, or what? How does that dealt with? We're going to approve a document that may or not stand for the review by other agencies.
Yeah, I personally do not see it not. They provide a template like a lot of other plans we have. They provide a template. The contractor that the state provided for follows that template to a T. Obviously, if there was any issue or challenge, they would come back to us. But basically, we provide the plan to them, so it's documented on record.
So they're just making sure we follow the template.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Vernon, we'll conclude by saying, 2020 has given us storms, earthquakes, even sand from the Sahara Desert. One of the things I'm going to give a shout out to former Mayor Pro Tem Vivian Burke, who always asked the question of your predecessor and of you, and we won't ask the same question today. No matter what happens in 2020, we have to be prepared. And I think that the Emergency Management Department stays that way. But Mr. Vernon, are we prepared?
Yes, sir. We are always prepared, but I'll tell you, we're always looking ways to improve our response. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, definitely good question. We certainly are prepared. And I think just between protests and pandemic and hurricanes and storms, and I had forgotten about the sub-Saharan dust storm, all our agencies work together pretty much on a daily basis. Some of those partners include the police department and the fire department and the 911 centers and a lot of the other agencies. We have great leadership. And so I certainly say we are prepared, but, there are the unknowns we're not aware of.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the document as submitted.
Second. I think our chair is frozen.
Yeah, he's
I
frozen.
think we need to try to get him back. Otherwise, the vice chair might have to take over the meeting.
We lose the chair, did we?
How much time do we have?
It's a hazard.
That's one of those man-made, that's one of those.
Yes, what man-made hazards.
Since this is a non-controversial issue, I'm going to go ahead and assume the role here and ask for, I moved, did we have a second?
Second.
Moved, properly motioned and seconded. I'm going to take the roll. Councilmember Larson.
Yes.
Councilmember Parman.
Yes.
I vote yes as well, and I think we're safe to assume that Mr. Taylor would have done the same. So motion passes.
Mr. Vice Chair, I have a question of Mr. August.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Vernon, is there anything that we need to be focusing on with our residents regarding that earthquake that came through? Is that something they need to have more information on at this time?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Yes, ma'am, good question. And we've gotten that question a lot since this weekend. What we are always educating the public on is what we call disaster preparedness. And it doesn't really matter whether it's a hurricane, an ice storm, or any other type of event. Certainly the tremor was unique, but we do get those about every 7 to 8 years on average. You know, again, we just want communities and families to be prepared with disaster preparedness kits. We really want people to have a plan. What would you do? As in the same boat that we're in, we have elderly parents that we're taking care of. We have children that we take care of. We have pets that we take care of that are very important to people. So really just to have a plan, have a disaster supply kit in some form or fashion. And I think the most important part is with the earthquake or any other disaster is to just have a conversation with your family, with your community, with your church, with whatever business you work at, and just ask the question, what would we do if this happens? But yes, earthquakes, tremors are one of our lower risk hazards, but as we saw the other day that, there is potential for that to happen.
Yeah.
But we always want to educate the public to just be prepared for any kind of disaster or crisis, no matter what kind it is.
May I suggest that I think marketing should do something special around that when we feel the shake, what do you need to do just as a preparation for families? Because I've lived in California before and I just got used to the rolling of the earthquakes. But this was very different because I had not felt it here and didn't anticipate it. So that's sort of new for us to be thinking about earthquakes in this area that you truly feel, and that 5.1 was significant.
Yes, ma'am. And I'll certainly talk to Mr. McNeil about that. And just to remind everybody, or you may or may not be aware, we do put education out on some of these things, and sometimes there's not a lot of interest. Every fall there is what's called the Great Shakeout. It's a FEMA initiative that all over the United States at a certain time, they will set off alerts, and school kids and business and everyone else can actually practice the proper techniques, just like we do a tornado drill every year during Severe Weather Awareness Week. So we can certainly put out additional information when the Great Shakeout occurs, I believe in September or October. There may be more interest in it now.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you,
Taylor. I made a naked power grab here and moved for carried through the vote on this, and we voted. It was 3-0. You can chime in and add your yes or no.
Certainly, my vote will be yes. So thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, for moving forward. And it's exactly the life we live. You know, when something happens, we have to be prepared to move forward. And so thank you, Mr. Vernon, for helping us to be that for the city of Winston-Salem. That concludes the consent and general agendas. However, we did not have an opportunity to print an item of discussion. I had a conversation with Councilwoman Parman and Councilwoman Scipio over the weekend, who had some concerns about violent crime and crime in the city of Winston-Salem, but particularly to the wards they represent in the East and the Northeast wards. So we have Assistant Chief Weaver here from the Winston-Salem Police Department to give us a brief update, and we'll allow Councilwoman Parman and Scipio to be able to ask some questions or get some information out to the public. Chief Weaver, you have the floor, sir.
Good evening, Chair Taylor, Councilmember McIntosh, Councilmember Larson, and Councilmember Parman. Violence, and especially gun violence, continues to be a challenge for the Winston-Salem Police Department and our community across the city, but especially in the Northeast, East, and Southeast wards. Assistant Chief Miles will discuss in some general detail our latest homicides, but I would like to state that because of the number of firearm offenses that we're experiencing, which not only include homicides and assaults with firearms against people, but it also includes houses, apartments, and vehicles being shot at. Please keep in mind that this is not only a Winston-Salem problem, but it's a North Carolina major city problem, as well as a national challenge for all law enforcement agencies. What we've observed here in our city is that there is at least some type of an acquaintance relationship between the people and or property that's being shot at and shot into. And it does not appear to be any type of random shooting by any persons that are out here. Some of these cases appear to be related to gang activity. As a result, in order for us to try and combat this, we have deployed specialized personnel for quick response to shooting events. Within our agency, we are fortunate that we have a gang unit that tries to deal with some of the gang activity trials. We have some other specialized units such as VFIT, our Violent Firearms Investigative Team, that have responsibility for this. But this challenge is so big for us that it's an entire departmental challenge that's going to be addressed by the entire department. Our deployed specialized personnel are able to have a quick response to some of these shooting events. They're securing the crime scenes upon arrival, and they're interviewing some of the potential witnesses that are out. But additionally, we're requesting that our citizens contact us or Crime Stoppers to provide us with the information on some of these offenses. And in our partnership with the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office, they will be joining us to assist us in combating these types of offenses within the city limits also. I'll turn it over now to Chief Miles.
Hi, Chairman Taylor and distinguished council members. To date, we have 18 homicides across the city. The last 6 homicides we had has taken place since the month of June. These incidents, for the most part, happened between the Northeast Ward and the Southeast Ward, with the last 3 being in the Southeast Ward, where we lost 2 14-year-old juveniles. Again, from June 1 to August 5th, the police department received 849 calls related to unlawful use of or possession of firearms. And of those 849, 516 of those involve unlawful discharge of firearms. And between that same time frame, we had 49 people that were actually shot in the city, and a significant number of those happened in those wards. Any questions?
Are there any questions for Chief Miles or Chief Weaver? I recognize Committee Member Parman.
Okay, so I don't necessarily want to say I have a question, but I do have some concerns. And one of them being the fact that we do have the.
He was trying to asking about the item that he didn't get to vote on. He handled it. I think the way he handled it is fine.
Go ahead, Councilwoman. You have the floor.
Oh, okay. So I understand we had the 18 homicides, but also in that area, how many of those cases were actually driven by juveniles?
We feel like juveniles are involved in many of the cases. For instance, in the one who, the 2 14-year-olds killed on Utah, we have arrested a 17-year-old who was involved in that incident also. So we are finding that a significant number of juveniles are involved in a large number of these incidents.
Okay, so, Chairman, so can I make a statement or do it have to be questions?
Now you have the floor, and then we're gonna come to Councilwoman Scipio. We've got this item on your agenda, so you could say your piece.
Here's the problem that the Northeast Ward is having that I want Public Safety Committee to actually know about. When we're talking about, at this point, not even the Northeast Ward, but even Winston-Salem, we have 2 babies that's 14 years old that are now deceased. Their parents are funeralizing their children at the hands of another juvenile. But the fact still remains that in order for these children to be doing this, there is someone orchestrating on the back end of it, which at this point, we have grown people who are puppeteering our babies into doing this criminal activity, because the law says that if you have a juvenile that's committing these crimes, we're not going to prosecute them because they don't have but so many strikes against them. So they get to go back home to their parents. So if they're going home to their parents, you don't have anyone to hold accountable for these actions, whether it's the gun violence or any other criminal activity, then we're enabling this behavior. The problem that I see also is we're, as a community now in the Northeast Ward, are hurting. We looked up in 2018, and there was an opioid epidemic that was taking over Forsyth County, and all hands was on deck for this opioid that was taking over the lives of our white children. Now we're crying out in our Black and brown communities with this same epidemic that's taken over, but it's gun violence. Why is it that we're not pursuing or pushing for the same type of results to help save our children? Because while everybody's around here worried about 2020 election for November, and we politicking, we still putting our babies in body bags. We still having to funeralize our children. We're talking about school going back in, and in 9 weeks, they're gonna be unsupervised because parents will still be at work. Teachers aren't there to give them that one-on-one mentorship or guidance that they're needing. So something has to happen where we have to allow our communities to be held accountable for their actions, but we also, as the city of Winston-Salem, have to stand with our Winston-Salem Police Department and say that whatever y'all have to do to bring forth the justice that these families need and to make sure that our neighborhoods are secure, then we stand with y'all to do that. We hired them to do a job. Don't restrict them or limit them on what it is that we want them to do, as long as they're enforcing the law and doing what they're hired to do. So I will always, as a veteran, I'm gonna always stand with my law enforcement. I love them, I support them, I respect them, but something has to come where we have to come to the table as city council and any other individuals and figure out a good plan. Like we say, we have to plot and plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize to move us to where we have to be to grow not only the Northeast Ward, but the East Ward, the Southeast Ward, and the North Ward. Because what's happening in our areas are gonna run over into the other areas. If we don't get it under control now, then it's gonna get so out of control that we're gonna lose control. So I just, as my take, I feel like we just have to start coming out and supporting the police department, but also pushing forward with a zero tolerance for gun violence, because either we gonna allow the police to do their part, or we gonna have a lawless city with a lot of senseless gun violence, and then we gonna hold who accountable? The babies, the adults, the parents, city council. Who do you hold accountable after we're not, putting forth the initiative to do something now? Because if we're talking about waiting 6 months from now, a year from now, how many more bodies will we have when you're talking about 83 aggravated assaults with a person being shot, 18 homicides, 1,981 discharge of firearms, our babies dying, all on the backs of us wanting to do, let's just play nice. We don't want to upset nobody. Let's be friends, but our baby's still dying. So that's my take on it, but we got to do something and it can't be sitting around doing nothing and continue to have conversation. We are aware of the problem. What's the solutions of the problems? And if my police department have a solution to help combat this gun violence in Winston-Salem and in Forsyth County, 10 toes, I'm down with you, and I got you back all the way to the end.
Well, Councilwoman Parman, I just want to say I'm committed to working to put together a plan, not only to address violence in the communities that you represent, but at the city at large. It's going to take a lot of things. If we could predict when a crime was going to happen, I think everyone in America would want to figure out how we could do that. But the fact is, we just can't predict when someone would go into a community and do something. But there are things that we can do. Right now, the council voted a few moments ago in finance to give $1 million to the Community Investments Committee to look at how do we invest into communities to reduce crime and violence. We're also had a conversation today about maybe putting cameras in communities like Utah Drive, where the two 14-year-olds were shot, and in many other communities such as Rolling Hills and the other areas of the city. But it's going to take some neighborhood involvement. I think we're all committed to getting in the trenches and getting this work done, and it's got to be more than talk, so I completely agree with you. We're going to go to Councilwoman Scipio. Before we do that, it's my understanding that Mr. McIntosh, do you have a question about anything that was said?
I'll yield to Councilmember Scipio, and I'll come back at the end, just a minor question.
Yes, sir. Councilwoman Scipio.
Thank you so much. When I got on the city council, I was so surprised that we have a real strategic plan that we are to follow and try to effect. And that strategic plan has several areas. One is called Safe and Secure Communities. The other one is Livable Neighborhoods. Another one is Healthy Environment. Now, I want to read you something that I received. Listen closely. The issue is this: there is not one night that goes by that I don't hear gunshots. Not one night. Some nights it's thankfully only 1 or 2 shots. Right, thankful for only 1 or 2. Then there are nights when I count beyond 10, 15, or more shots. It just feels crazy to live in your home minutes from downtown Winston-Salem, and every night I hear the same mess. I used to call the non-emergency number and report every shooting I hear. Didn't matter if I requested to be contacted with an update or not, I never received that call. Eventually, I became numb and felt helpless, and stopped calling altogether. I began to let my son get in bed with me when he was scared and coax my girls into believing that we were safe within the walls of our home. But this increasingly feels not true. I am certain that the majority of the gunshots originate from Farrell Court area, the Rolling Hills apartments. When I research crime in that area, man, there is a long-standing history of violence. I can't understand why it cannot be snuffed. I am tired of us Black people choosing to live within this ward and be made to feel as if we choose to put up with this level of violence. I have white associates that live in regular homes in other areas of Winston-Salem, and they never hear a gunshot. And I am sure that if they were to hear such a thing, there would be a swarm of officers protecting that neighborhood from further attacks and discomfort. My husband and I have considered moving. But of course, you know, our home is not worth what it would be if we had the same home off Polo, Hawthorne, or any other predominantly white area. Also, God has not moved me yet, and fear should not control my actions in this manner. That was from one of my beloved residents, beautiful mother, and I know her father. They live in one of our traditional neighborhoods that they should not be fearful. This is just one email. I get this from everyone, not just in the area by Rolling Hills. This is in Skyland Park, the other side of Rolling Hills. I get this kind of letter from people all up in Reynoldstown, all the way over to Highland Avenue, down into Slater Park, Now, I'm going to want to make one thing clear. This is not racial. This is not a racial issue. This is not about poverty. This is about crime. This is about bad behavior. And it is important that our residents know that we have law enforcement working on their behalf. I will not go back into the myths and the realities of history, but right now, I know we have an excellent police force. It's wonderful. And they have been building up mightily since the 1980s with understanding diversity and the social issues in this community. We need to allow our police department to do the work that we pay them to do. And that is to maintain safety and security and peace in our neighborhoods. And I am asking right now today, Public Safety Committee, it must start with you supporting the efforts of our Winston-Salem PD. Now, this crime, this gun violence is not something that's going to be solved with a social program that's going to take 2 and 3 years to effect. This is not a social program issue. This is very much like cancer. I have had 2 brothers with cancer over the last 4 years. One had throat cancer. It took 4 months of intense radiation 5 days a week. That was immediate, it was directed, and yes, it left some hard things for him to have to come and overcome. But he's alive today and the cancer is gone. The other brother has had 3 years of chemotherapy. It's been every 3 weeks for 3 years. Yes, it was evasive, but it was slow. And yes, he had some things he's got to overcome. Gun violence is not something we solve with one method or one technique. It's going to take a lot of different things. But we do know this, that the knowledge of how to do that starts with our Winston-Salem Police Department. They know what needs to be done to stop these gunshots all night. I heard 4 gunshots Sunday morning. My daughter heard them at 2 at midnight, and I had 4 at 3 a.m. There is nothing, that's nothing right for anybody to have to be awakened with gun violence, gunshots. But we, Councilmember Parman and I, have been working with our police department, and they are in favor of letting the community know they will not tolerate gun violence in this community. I ask all of us to be courageous and don't fear, but we have to tell people what we're going to do. And we have to know that this is the right thing to do. I am totally in favor of also doing various community programs if that would take care of the problem down the road. But right now, we have residents who are afraid to sit on their porch. We have children who can't play in their front yards or their backyards. We have folks who can't walk down the street. There are drive-by shootings. We're not in, what's that place, Chicago, where the mob used to be. This is Winston-Salem. People are amazed that we have this kind of violence going on. And yet they say, what's the city council doing? Why don't they do something about this? They're looking to us for leadership. Now, and I would say to anybody who is not in favor of the Winston-Salem Police Department doing what they are tasked to do, I want you to come with me this weekend and you can live in our neighborhoods. I have a couple apartments for you to live there, and you have to live there at least a month. Because you got to know the trauma that our neighbors are feeling. We have law-abiding people going out getting guns because they are afraid. We have our firemen being traumatized, having to go to these calls and seeing 14-year-olds murdered on the street. Murdered. This is serious business. Murdered. 14-year-olds. There is a problem when we have 9-year-olds walking around with Uzis. And everybody says, oh, we can do something nice. This is not a nice situation. We have to be very wise. And if you allow this to continue, it will then go across the entire city into the county. This is unacceptable behavior, and we need to make sure the residents of Winston-Salem are not in favor of tolerating gun violence. And we need to make sure our police department is not handcuffed because we don't support them.
Councilwoman Scipio, I'll say
yes
to you and to Councilwoman Parman, we have heard you loud and clear. We take this thing seriously, we take you seriously, and we will put together a plan to try to address this and to try to adjust and address this. You have my word, and we will be back in communication with the police department and the two of you to try to get this thing moving forward. Is that sufficient?
That is sufficient, but I also want to tell you that that citizens group that's been put together to spend $1 million, they're not talking about gun violence. That's not what they're talking about.
What the good thing is,
they're not even talking about social programs because the direction is not clear for them what they should be doing. So they need to know what's really going on in this community so they will know what they need to be focusing on. It's not just giving another agency some more money. You got to look at what the critical issues we're facing. So, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure I know that you are in support of our Winston-Salem PD doing their job.
Let me start by saying this. I'm actually from the neighborhoods that you're referring to, and I spent more than half my life working in these departments and in these programs to make a difference in our community. So you can sort of miss me with that. But I do understand where you're coming from, and we will put together a plan to address your issues. And I don't know what else it is to say. This is serious, and this ain't gonna be solved with the conversation. We're gonna get out, we're gonna knock on doors, we're gonna put the programs together, and we're gonna do the right thing to reduce this crime in our communities. And that's just it. I don't know what else to say other than that. So the answer is yes, and we'll get back to you with the plan. Is there anyone else who needs to be heard regarding this item?
I believe McIntosh, but I'd like to have a comment if possible.
Councilman McIntosh, then we'll move to Councilman Larson.
I'm good. My question got answered.
Thank you. Councilman Larson.
Let me just say that we fully support the police department. I don't think there's a person on city council who at any time questions the professional conduct and abilities of our police. Gun violence is a very specific aspect of what we're dealing with now, and it is compelling. We're seeing a lot of it right now. And I don't know what the arrest record is. We've got 18 homicides and 49 gunshot wounds. I don't know how many more shootings we've actually had where somebody wasn't actually hit. I'm very grateful for the Baptist Hospital and their ability to patch people up, as it were. I think you have to also know that there's some things that council can do and should be doing. I mean, in the last several years, we've supported a auto triangular system of trying to identify gunshot locations more effectively. We've come up with a program of shell casing identification, which hopefully will help us identify the guns that are used in multiple crimes. We've talked today a lot about cameras, and I think all of us are in favor of getting more cameras. There's no question that we have to go where the crime is. But if the crime is in specific wards, we need to have the police free to go and concentrate their efforts in identifying where the crime is and attacking it. I think all council and I, for myself, certainly would support efforts by the police to address this as aggressively as possible. We are supportive of the police department. We're going to get them some new vehicles pretty soon, which will be an improvement over the current vehicles that they're operating out of. The technology is a solution, but citizenry also is a solution. We've got to have support of the neighborhoods. We've got to have programs that allow engagement by the police in the neighborhoods in a positive way. And I think we're working toward that. So I'm maybe a little more optimistic about what we can do. I think we need to get on with it. I agree with Council Chairman Taylor, is that he's obviously a proponent of cameras. I think we all agree to that. I think we just need to get on with some positive things, and I'm anxious to hear additional things that maybe the police suggest we could do as council to help them do their job better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Larson, thank you for your comments. Councilman Bessie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to say that I have been participating in public safety meetings, even though I'm not a member of the committee, and have for years asked both in meetings and in private leaders in our police department if there are additional steps that we can take to support them in their efforts, because I do support them. And I cannot recall this committee receiving or myself receiving a request for support in addressing gun violence from leadership of our police department, which is doing an outstanding job in many ways. I cannot recall getting a request for them to which we said no.
That has never happened. You're correct.
This is a serious issue. It is a citywide issue. It is a nationwide issue. We are seeing an epidemic of gun violence across our nation, in part because there is a flood of weapons of war on the street. It has to be addressed in that fashion. But we have to be careful not to, if you'll pardon the bad cliche, do anything on the basis of ready, fire, aim. We have to be cautious that what we do is a constructive approach to the problem. And I fully support Chairman Taylor in his determination that we act as aggressively as we can in ways that will actually address the issues in our community, because it is community-wide. A young man who lived less than half a mile from where I live apparently took his own life. Less than a block away from where I used to live, another young man was shot when he was at a gathering. This is a community-wide issue. We have to address it as such, and I support taking a deliberate approach to not only do whatever we can do to address it through law enforcement, but with the understanding that the issues go beyond what can be addressed by the police alone. So we have to provide support in other mechanisms. And I believe that Chairman Taylor is committed to seeing that we put together plans to do that. And I thank you for the opportunity to make comments.
Thank you, Councilman Bessie. Before we move to adjourn, I do want to recognize Assistant Chief Weaver for additional comments.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair Taylor. I want to express our appreciation for all of the support that we're getting from not only the Public Safety Committee, but also from the City Council, all of our elected officials throughout Forsyth County. I did want to let you know that in 2019, Winston-Salem Police Department seized over 1,000 guns. And in 2020, we are on track to seize more than 1,000 guns. So it is an issue. Because we noticed that there have been concerns with what's going on with our juveniles, and keep in mind that the juvenile system is best described as being set up to do what's in the best interest of the juvenile, and that does not always take into consideration the best interest of what the community stands for. So with that, within the past several weeks, Assistant Chief Miles, Assistant Chief Penn, Chief Thompson, and I have met with juvenile intake counselors, the judges, also some personnel from the District Attorney's Office, as well as the Department of Social Services, in an effort to make sure that the dangerous juveniles that we have out here in our city, we're able to put them in secure custody to keep them from rearming themselves and keep them from going out and committing these firearms offenses. So we are doing everything that we possibly can at this point in time. But just as it was in the mid-'80s when you were dealing with street level drugs, is you take one juvenile off the street with a firearm, another takes its place. The issue that we're finding with these firearms is that on about a weekly basis, a firearm is being stolen out of an unlocked vehicle, where our citizens are riding around with their firearms in their vehicles, leaving them, whether it's at their residence or out in parking lots, unlocked, and those weapons are being stolen that way. Additionally, we're also working with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to try and address this. So we've got our federal partners engaged in it, as well as state and the other local partners. We all are working together to try and combat this violent scourge that's occurring not only in our city, in our state, and across our country. But you're exactly correct in the statements that you're making. Something has got to be done at all levels, especially when it comes to our community members providing us with information so that we can stop these weapons from getting into the hands of people that don't need to have weapons, and so that they'll stop being used against our other citizens out here. We appreciate your time. We appreciate all that you do to support us. Thank you so much.
Chief Weaver, thank you for your comments. We'll let that be the last word. We'll conclude by saying thank everybody who is working in public safety, police, fire, and emergency management for what you do.
Thank you.
The police department, we love you, we trust you, and we will work with you to solve these problems. This wasn't done overnight. The problems were not created overnight, but we are committed to solving them. Chief, thank you. And we are willing and ready to work with you to put a plan together to solve the issues that we're facing in our community. So thank you, council members. We've heard you loud and clear. We take you seriously into our community. We take you seriously. We will get to the bottom of it, and we will do better. Thank you all for what you do to make our city be a better place to work and relax. We'll consider this meeting to be adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.